Hey there YouTube, Travis here. So we're back with the late 90s Tomos Targa with an A35. And specifically today we're going to talk about ignition timing with a CDI on this engine. We're going to talk about it when you don't have any marks on the case or the flywheel, and you're also not using the flywheel key or the flywheel pin, as it's called sometimes. So in this video we're going to talk about, a little bit of the history on Tomos ignition, why you'd want to do this, or why you might have to do this in this case, and then we'll go through actually setting the timing without any of those variables. All right, so before we dive in on how it works in the history, I just want to clear up a misconception that seems to persist on the internet that says that Tomos CDI timing is not adjustable. That is wrong. A better way to describe it is that under normal circumstances, if you're running the stock CDI with an OEM crankshaft on an actual Tomos engine, it's really that these flywheels and stators are maintenance free, where generally you don't have to do adjustments. But in this case, unfortunately, I do. Okay, so why would you want to time the Tomos CDI, the nice maintenance-free Tomos CDI without the flywheel key? Really three reasons. So first, possibly you've damaged the flywheel key, you've sheared it, maybe you tried to run the engine when the flywheel wasn't on there all the way and it just totally smeared it. The keyway in the flywheel itself could also be damaged because of that. So the crankshaft could be damaged, it needs repair, but with an otherwise functioning motor, you can totally install the CDI and run it without the key. It could also be because you're using these nice Tomos ignitions on a different engine, so you can totally run these on an E50 or a ZA50. Some bigger minds than me will have to weigh in, I believe, because the E50 rotates the opposite direction of the Tomos and the ZA. You'd have to flip the coil, but it has been done, and these are nice, reliable ignitions. Or the third reason, which is why I'm here. Unfortunately, so this is an aftermarket crankshaft. This motor I rebuilt about 2 years ago, and it seems to be a somewhat, reported issue that the actual keyway in the flywheel is machined at just the wrong spot. So if you just put this together, the timing comes in low. I've confirmed that with a timing light. It's unfortunate. Again, the crankshaft, perfectly functional otherwise. So I'm just going to set the timing on this without the key. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how the CDI ignition works, the history of it with Tomos specifically. If you just want to see how to actually set this timing, I'll use the YouTube annotation so you can skip ahead and also put a little timestamp right there. So to take a step back, this is a Tomos A35, obviously, but the original Tomos engine, the A3, at least the one that came on US-based models, that A3 in the first few years of the A35 used points and condenser ignition. So for those of us coming from, working on Pookie 50s with points and condenser ignition, pretty relatable. And then around 1994, the first CDIs came on these motors. And the thing about a CDI, you have to kind of take your brain from the points and condenser model and kind of get used to a new way of thinking. With points, when the points break open, that's when the spark happens. But with a CDI, there is a point on the stator and on the flywheel that when they meet every single time, that's when the spark is going to happen. And so our exercise here, when we get into actually setting this timing, is going to be making sure that that exact point is happening when the piston is at the correct point in its travel inside the cylinder. All right, so what we're looking at right now, this is an Escura flywheel. The Escura ignition right here, it's labeled on the CDI box as well. This is the ignition that was on this moped originally. Generally pretty robust units. My understanding is the way it works is as the flywheel spins, it builds up charge, and that capacitor discharge happens at a certain point every single time. Again, not too much to say about these. These are generally very robust, very reliable. I've heard there's about 10 different Tomos CDI ignitions. I'll show another example here in a minute that's a little bit more modern. And what we're looking at right now is actually a Tomos A35 engine, so from the mid-2000s and later. I wanted to show this engine. This is hard seized, unfortunately, but the CDI unit and box are still here. So I wanted to talk about this one because unlike the Escura CDI, which again, as it spun, voltage built up and discharged at a certain place, this actually has an external pulsar right here. So this is a trigger that basically says when the spark will happen. So my understanding is that these ones, in this case, you can't adjust the timing by rotating the stator plate like you can with the earlier CDIs. For adjusting timing for these, I believe most people will just go and they will swap out the CDI box for something like a different curve. But I wanted to mention that in case you happen to be working on an A55. But we'll jump back to our A35 now, and we'll talk a little bit about what we're about to do. In case you were curious, this CDI is from AET. So again, playing with these flywheels, if we were just going to install them kind of willy-nilly, there's no guarantee that the piston that's in the cylinder, so this is half of an engine right here, there's no guarantee that this is actually going to be anywhere close to the spark plug. So without that flywheel key, what we need to do is make sure that we get that piston about 1.5 millimeters before top dead center. So if we remove the head, again, pretend this is an actual engine here, based on the rotation of this crankshaft. So right now, this thing is basically at top dead center. So it's at its furthest point of travel. And you might think, well, why not just set the timing so that the spark happens right at top dead center? And the reason for that is, well, there needs to actually be time and room for that explosion of premixed gasoline and spark to happen. So this wouldn't be a very efficient place to set timing if it would even run at all. According to the Tomos service manual, they state that 1.5 millimeters before top dead center, plus or minus 0.2 millimeters. Generally, that's where you're going to get the maximum amount of expansion potential for the fuel mixture. So that's going to give you the most power. And so we're going to go ahead and start with that as a reference point. And before we go any further, I just really want to hammer this in to people like me who are coming from the POOC E50 points and condenser world. We're talking about some different things here. So when you're working on a POOC, people are often talking about things in terms of degrees before top dead center. So yes, on a POOC E50 flywheel, again, even though these Tomos flywheels are also, the same size, generally, 1 degree equals 1 millimeter before top dead center. So POOC flywheels, the stock timing is around 18 degrees. And if you've got a performance setup, you want to lower it to like 14.5 or 15, great. But what we're talking about here is millimeters before top dead center. So, don't go out drawing marks on your flywheel like you do with a POOC E50 flywheel and trying to set this like at 1.5 millimeters on the flywheel. This is different. We're actually measuring 1.5 millimeters in terms of the piston's travel in the cylinder. So the head, the cylinder, the piston, that's what you want. That's where you want the spark to happen. Again, Tomos, 1.5 millimeters before top dead center, plus or minus 0.2. If you wanted to translate that to degrees, so 1.5 would be about here. 1.3 would be the low end. So 18 degrees to 21-ish is the translation. So it's a similar, like at the end of the day, it's a similar measurement. But when you read online and people talk about setting timing in terms of degrees before top dead center and millimeters before top dead center, it's a little different. So we're in Tomos world. We're going to keep talking about this in terms of 1.5 millimeters before top dead center. And we're going to go ahead and actually set that right now. I hope that kind of helps clarify things. Again, when you're coming from like a very antiquated POOC points and condenser world, it's just something that takes some getting used to. All right, so setting this timing without the flywheel key and also without relying on any marks that may or may not be on the case or the flywheel. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make a reference mark on the case. And the only rule here, it can be made anywhere. You just want to make it in a place where you can see it. So don't make it on the bottom of the case or anything like that. This is just for when we hit this with the timing light, we can see it easily. So you can do it like with a Sharpie like I just did. I am also going to make this a permanent mark. So I'm going to scribe this. I'm just going to cut into the case a little bit with this knife, and then make it so that even if this washes off, because we've got, premix flying everywhere and all sorts of other moped-y stuff, that it's always going to be visible. I just also want to call out, I'm going to ignore the 2 marks on the case here. Those are for if you have the flywheel key, which we don't. Also, I've seen Tomos A35 cases that actually don't have these marks at all. So again, they exist, but we're timing here without the flywheel key, so we've made our own mark. Okay, step 2, we make a mark on the flywheel. And we can make this mark literally anywhere on the flywheel. I would recommend using something like a grease pen. You can buy at like a hardware store, or you can do a Sharpie and then just have some rubbing alcohol and a paper towel to wipe it off. But, honestly, we're just gonna kind of make this mark anywhere. So go ahead, make your mark. And now we hook up the moped to a timing light powered by a 12-volt battery. I've got this hooked up to my truck. And let's see where we're at. Okay, so as you can see, we were firing, the mark on the flywheel was back here, whereas the mark on the case is actually up here. So we're a little ways off, and if you can figure it out, we're going to wipe off that old mark, and we're going to make a new one much closer to where our mark is on the case. And we're going to go ahead and check it again and see if we're close. So obviously that test was pretty easy to do because the moped was running. If the moped isn't running, you can get the same result using a drill. Because this engine spins counterclockwise, you put the drill in reverse. This is a 17 socket for this Tomos flywheel. You spin the flywheel, hit it with the timing light, and you'll still be able to see where it's firing. All right, we are close-er, but still not quite. So this new line that I have, I was actually so confident about it, I drew it in Sharpie, whoops. We're firing about here. So probably about ½ an inch more to the left, and we should be dead on. So I'm going to make a second mark, and we're just going to remember that the mark on the left is the correct one. All right, that was amazing. So now we know exactly where this flywheel is going to fire on the stator no matter where we put it. So you could literally take this flywheel off, spin it, 180 degrees, put it back on there, and those marks, that second mark, is going to be where this fires every single time. Excellent. So we're nearly there. Now all we have to do is make sure that those 2 marks line up when the piston is in the right height inside the cylinder. Let's get back in the garage and make that happen. All right, so now we're going to get rid of all the marks we made except for that last one, which was the mark that lines up with the mark on the case. When you're getting rid of this stuff you've put down, you can use rubbing alcohol. 70% will work, 90% is better, and just some elbow grease. So yes, as stated, when the flywheel and the stator are lined up at this mark, between the mark on the flywheel and the mark on the case, we know the CDI is going to fire. It does us no good, though, if the piston is way down here when those 2 marks line up. So we're going to go ahead and take the flywheel off, get the piston set at the correct height, so like 1.5, 1.7, 1.8 if you want to get a little spicy, and see how we do. Puke flywheel puller threads in real nice here. So normally for the screws that hold on the stator, it's a good practice to leave them kind of in the middle to give you some adjustment. It's really nice if you're working with a flywheel like this with these somewhat large windows for that. Probably have to have the tiniest fingers of all time to get through this. So I'm still going to leave them in the middle, but I just wanted to point that out. Depending on your setup, that might work for you. So next, I'm going to use my Buzetti timing tool to find top dead center and then to push this plunger 1.7 or 1.8 millimeters down. And then, basically move the piston up right against it, hold the piston in place, zap the flywheel on. That's how it's supposed to work anyway. So for using this tool, I like to undo it all the way. Allows me to much more easily thread it in. And you'll notice there is a line on this tool. That's what we're going to use as a reference. I can use my nice socket to get it threaded down there. Now we have the rest of it. So what I'm going to do is screw it in, and I'm going to back it out 2 turns. You could also back it out 3 turns. The idea here is we got to make sure we have enough physical room on the tool to turn it in 1.5 or 1.7 millimeters, whatever you want to set it to. So we're bottomed out. Now if we look down on the bottom, you can see we're sitting at a 2. So I'm going to go back to 0, and then I'm going to do a full rotation back. 0, 1.5, 2. I'm going to make the 0 marks on the tool line up. So now I'm going to take my flywheel and I'm just going to put it back on here and kind of push it on with my hand enough where I can actually rotate the engine. Remember, the engine rotates counterclockwise. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it. All right, unfortunately not quite tight enough here, just playing with it with my hand, so I got to zap it back on. Just a little bit, but now we're definitely connected. So, all right, engine spinning counterclockwise as it spins. We're going to rotate and coming up. Say right about there is top dead center. So I'm going to lock down the dowel with the tool. So we're going to tighten. We're going to use, I have an Allen in here, an Allen key style sockets. We're going to tighten down. Okay. So we've got this thing tightened down at top dead center. We're going to rotate the piston back down. So we're actually going to go clockwise. So we get it down in the bottom. And now what we're going to do, because this is locked, is we're going to rotate it in however far you want to set your timing. So in my case, this is a stock cylinder with just a bi-turbo exhaust. I'm pretty confident about my temps here. I'm going to go for like 1.7, probably 1.8 millimeters before top dead center. If you have a performance setup, probably a little bit wiser to start at 1.5, see how you do. And if your temps are good, you can advance it if you want more power. But I'm feeling confident here. So what I'm going to do is rotate this 1 full rotation, and then we'll get until the 7 mark shows. And this dowel is locked in. So basically, rotating it in is going to push the dowel down that far. All right, excellent. So when we rotate the piston back up, it should bump up against it. Good. There. So the piston is being held at 1.8 millimeters before top dead center, which is what I've chosen to set my timing to. The trick now is going to be to get this flywheel off and to put it back on with the marks lining up without moving the piston back down. So basically holding the crank exactly where it is. You just got to be real careful and really try and keep an eye on things. This is just kind of like, it might not be perfect every single time, but again, you're timing without the flywheel key. It's also worth mentioning, if you ever need to take the flywheel off ever again, you must repeat this whole process with the micrometer or a set of digital calipers, whatever you want to use to make sure your piston's measured at the right height. All right, let's see if I can do this. Okay, all right, hoping that piston is still bumped up against there. Find our Sharpie mark and our case mark. And then very carefully get it lined up. Okay, so now we're saying, okay, moped, whenever the piston is at this height, you are going to fire. So we're going to have it fire 1.8 millimeters before top dead center. So unfortunately, it doesn't really do much good to actually hit this with the timing light. Again, it's going to line up here just like it did if we put the flywheel on in any direction. It's, again, just different than points, where that's kind of like the ultimate decider, or the ultimate kind of verifying layer. Okay, so pretty good. Our marks are lined up. Timing tool comes back out. Spark plug goes back in, and we should be all set with our timing. Okay there, YouTube. Hope you enjoyed that. Until next time.